Well, good afternoon, everybody. And like Professor Turner said, this is my third and last presentation of my thesis project, which is long-range evolution of man in the naval warfare, the ancient world, part 3, late antiquity, and this is really where the ancient world is considered to end. So let's get to it. And just to remind you of what I'm doing here is basically, again, I chose this topic. It was free to choose, so I just picked that one because I like it. And I had to do research on something that involved change or evolution. And so I decided to find the patterns that would explain why and how warfare evolved in the ancient world. And you saw 4 of these last time I talked about them, and I added a new one this past weeks as I kept doing my research. So just refresh our memories. The first one that I established a long time ago was the tweaking pattern, and this one is just concerns little adjustments that are made by civilizations to evolve and to change. But these are the key word here is adjustment. It's not a big change, a radical change, just an adjustment that usually comes out of need or out of the need to survive. Usually that's where it comes from. The second one is the techie pattern. The word hidden there, of course, is technical, and there are 2 concerns for this one. The first one is technology, of course, like we talked about the first time about how they moved from from bronze to iron weapons, and then how tools and weapons evolved. All these are technological patterns, but also the other technical stuff that is included in this pattern is the ones that are regard organization and logistics and just handling stuff. That's also included in this pattern because it's technical. It requires skill, and we saw a lot of them, and we will see some more today. The third one was the sponge pattern. Of course, there's reference to the sponge because the key word here is absorption. And this is another pattern that we've noticed all throughout this research, that a lot of civilizations absorb either from other people, either from one person, from people they fight, people that invade them, or even so from people in the past. With this time in history, you already start seeing historians. There are historians at this point, so generals and people in government are reading about what these people used to do, and they absorb some of their ideas and they put them into practice through their own minds, which that leads us to the next pattern, which is the geek pattern. And this usually concerns only characters, actual people or a group of people who really stand out for their brilliant minds, usually the brilliant military minds. And this is the pattern when we see all the great names we've talked about. Philip II. Last time we closed talking about Alexander the Great. Today we're going to look at 2 of the other 2 biggest figures in ancient military history. So that is the geek pattern, and usually this is the one that sticks out for the longest time, and it usually has the biggest impact in the evolution of warfare. And then the last one, the one I just added, is called the fusion pattern. And this one, the word fusion, it refers to the idea that it combines 2 or more patterns. And the clear example we're going to see today, in which all the 4 first patterns are combined to form one single evolution. And that's a clear example of fusion pattern. And I had noticed this pattern before since the early stages of my research, but I wasn't too convinced about it to actually make it one of the patterns. But after what I researched the past few weeks, it was pretty clear that I had to include it. So, and you'll get to see that today why. So that said, just so you know where we are in the timeline, late antiquity starts in the 3rd century BC. That's where we left off last time. Last time we left off in the end of the 4th century BC with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. And you just kind of take for granted those 23 years as a transition period from one period to the next. And this is really 3rd century BC where late antiquity starts. And of course the key number, or the key date, is the one at the bottom, 476 AD. That's where this period ends with the fall of Rome, which we will talk about today. And these are just the names of the civilizations and groups that we will look at today: the Diadochi, the top, Carthaginians, Romans, and in the end, barbarians. So this is just so you know where we are. Okay, so the Diadochi kingdoms. Here's the map, and here, if you remember from last time, probably about the map, when Alexander died, he had coined the largest empire in the ancient world. His empire stretched from Greece all the way to the borders of China and India. So it was a huge empire, the largest one to that date. And the problem was that when Alexander died, before he died, he lost his speech. He couldn't talk anymore. So when the real problem came when he couldn't he couldn't pretty much name an heir to his empire. Of course, his generals were very concerned. They knew he was not going to make it, so they wanted to know who was going to take control of the empire. But according to the myth, all that Alexander was able to say was the strongest one. Well, that phrase can have a lot of interpretations, so it's not very clear. They really wanted a name, but Alexander really could not give a name, and so there was really nobody to take over his kingdom. And he did have an heir born to Roxanne, his Persian wife. She was Persian, I'm pretty sure she was Persian. And Alexander IV, but he was just a baby back then, so he couldn't really take over, and they wouldn't hand the power to the mom. So the decision was to split the empire in mainly 5 parts that each would be led by one of the generals. The largest one was the one in the middle, the one Seleucid Empire, the kingdom of the Seleucids. That was the largest one. Then you had Ptolemy, who took control of the Egypt region and started the Ptolemaic dynasty. And then all these different shades of colors that you see, all those were the kingdoms in which the empire of Alexander divided into. So at this point, we see 2 patterns that happen here. One is a pattern that showed up, and the other one was a pattern that was clearly missing. The first one is the one that did show up was the sponge pattern, and this showed up in the armies, because of course now that the empire was split and each of them had its own kingdom, well, they weren't pleased with that. Men are greedy and they wanted more. They wanted to unify all the kingdoms under their own rules. So now they were fighting each other. That's what basically this period is also known as the Diadochi Wars. And yeah, they fought each other. And you remember from last time also, when we talked about Alexander and the very last big battle that he fought at the river Hydaspes in India, he faced for the first time war elephants. That was one of the first times in warfare where elephants, we know that elephants were used in a battle. And even though the Macedonians, Alexander won the battle, he really realized how powerful and how big of an impact war elephants could have in the battlefield. So of course his generals who were with him in that campaign in India, they of course remember that, and they added this to their Hellenistic armies. Hellenism is, of course, the period after Alexander's death. So pretty much all the armies that were fighting each other for these kingdoms were Hellenistic armies, and they all had this absorption from the Indian armies, which were the war elephants. You see the picture at the bottom. You can see some of those. That's the main formation. The main infantry you see at the bottom, those are the phalangites. That was the core of the infantry for all the armies, and now you see that elephants are being mixed in. So that is clearly a sponge pattern that they got from it. Now the problem was that there was an absence of another pattern, which was the geek pattern. Even though all these generals fought with Alexander, some of them were close friends to him from even childhood, none of them was really as capable as he was. So really we don't even have any brilliant minds that could do what Alexander did. None of those generals was able to unite all the kingdoms to even to defeat all the other kingdoms and take control. They just didn't have it, you know. So that absence of geeks, I guess, for the purpose of our pattern, really hurt it, and that would eventually lead to the downfall of these kingdoms to Rome. Eventually, most of them fell to the Romans. So that's two patterns there, and now we move to this period. And this period is where we see the rise of Rome. This is really the war when Rome began to be reckoned as a world power. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 before Christ. You know, the legend of Remo and Romulus and the wolf that fed them and all that legend. But I mean, in reality, they didn't rise to power until this period, until late antiquity. And you know, there were a lot of peoples in Italy. The Etruscans were the predecessors of the Romans. Those are pretty much where Romans came from. And you know, they were minding their own business over there in Italy. It was Greece really that was the power in the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe. But eventually these peoples in Italy, the Etruscans, began to gain power. You know, they began to expand, mainly because of their military system, which I'll talk about in a minute. So they started to expand, they started to get more powerful, they started to get to conquer the other peoples around them, and eventually they get to control all of Italy. And the problem started when across the Mediterranean they had people who were also rising to power, which were the Carthaginians, which you can see them right here. Let's see if I can point it for you. Okay, so here's Rome, this is Carthage, right there in the right across the Mediterranean. And if you pay attention right here, there's a piece of land between them. This is Sicily, the island of Sicily. And as you can see there, half of it was owned by Carthage. The other one was kind of independent, where it was kind of allied to Rome. So what happened was that eventually a conflict broke out between the Sicilians and the Carthaginians living in Sicily. And so when that conflict broke out, well, the Sicilians asked Rome for help. It was, of course, all in Rome's interest to defeat the Carthaginians, so they agreed to help them, and so the Punic War started. There were 3 wars that were fought between Rome and Carthage. All of them were won by Rome, but the most important one was the second one. That was really when Rome displayed. It was, okay, let me say this. It was the most dangerous one for Rome. It was when they really almost lose everything, but at the same time, it was a decisive victory at the end, and we will talk about that in a second. So this is really where it starts off, and you know, the first Punic War goes along, Rome wins, but Carthage is still pretty strong. You know, they put some laws, some kind of punishments for Carthage. They try to put some restrictions on them, but eventually they don't respect them. They break them, and so the second Punic War breaks out. And this is really the big one for Rome. The Carthaginian Empire began to expand. You see that it took half of Spain. Well, it wasn't called Spain back then. It was called Iberia. So it was all owned, well, half of it was owned by Carthage. And you know, the Carthaginian army was not as good as the Roman army was, but their generals, it was their commanders that made the whole difference. You have great names like Hasdrubal, like Amilcar from the Barca family, but it was one particular one who really was the terror of Rome. That was Hannibal, and I'm sure you've heard about Hannibal. He was really probably the biggest threat that Rome ever faced. He put Rome to its knees over and over and over again. What he did was he had an army. Well, first of all, it was pretty impressive that he had an army of all nationalities. You know, he marched across North Africa, recruiting troops, all the way to Spain. He kept recruiting troops. So you have all nationalities, people speaking different languages. So he really couldn't communicate with them. He would just communicate through, you know, symbols or sounds. You know, it's pretty impressive that he managed to do what he did with an army that he couldn't even communicate with for the most part. So you know, eventually he's ready to avenge the first Punic War. He was ready to take Rome down. So what he does is he starts this campaign, and now when he gets to Spain, he wants to invade Italy from the north. So, you know, usually he would take the main road, which is down the coastline, just follow the coastline where you can be supported by your fleet in the water. Carthage was way superior to Rome in the water. They really owned the waters. But I mean, Rome, he kind of assumed Romans were going to assume as well that he's going to take the main road, and the Romans did assume that, and they actually fortified, especially this city, Massilia. They set up very, very strong fortifications there to stop Hannibal. But, you know, Hannibal was a pretty brilliant guy, military genius, so what he did was he took the kind of the other path, and he went right and straight through the Alps in the middle of the winter. The Alps are around this area in the north part of Italy, so he didn't take the main road. He went behind it and through the Alps into northern Italy. Now, this was a decision that the Romans didn't expect. It really took them by surprise, and I mean, it was very risky. Hannibal lost half of his army crossing the Alps, not only because of the winter, but also because there were tribes that were living in the Alps, and you know, he made sure that he could have the allegiance of some of them before he marched through, but there were others that he had to fight. So, you know, between those two, between the enemies and the winter of the Alps, he lost half of his army. But even then, with half of his army, and when he got to Italy, then the Romans were going to fight him. So they assembled armies and they started fighting Hannibal in open field battles. You know, the first one, and they fought three main battles. They were the Trasimenus, the Lake Trasimenus, the Trebia, and there's another battle, I forget the name. And Hannibal just completely crushed the Romans. He really humiliated them in the battlefield. He's probably the best, arguably the best tactician in the ancient world. You know, his strategic vision was not as good as Alexander's or Julius Caesar's, but his tactics in the battlefield were just unmatched. And after defeating Rome in these three battles, well, Rome decides, some of the generals are suggesting to have a scorched earth strategy, which means basically don't fight in the open field, basically just stand back, defensive strategy. And you see there's another pattern there, because that's exactly what the Assyrians, well, what other people did to the Assyrians 2,000 years before them. You know, so that's a good example of how learning history could be also linked to a sponge pattern. And so eventually, Rome kind of grows, you know, desperate for it, and they kind of want to finish off Hannibal once and for all. So Hannibal is camping in the southeast part of Italy, and Rome decides to send the largest army it has ever assembled to finish off Hannibal. It's two consular armies, over 80,000 men, to one single battle, just out for killing Hannibal and ending this threat. And that leads to this battle, one of the most famous battles of the ancient world in all time, really. What happened was, let me try to erase all this. There we go. Okay, so basically what happens is, the reason why I'm going into the actual battle is because this battle is so famous that it's still used today in military academies to teach about tactics and strategies. Of course, they cannot operate battles today the same way Hannibal did, but just the concept, the theory of it, is what's still taught today in military academies. And you know, this is straight geek pattern. Hannibal, there's a sculpture of him up there, just the greatest tactician of the ancient world. So I'm going to walk you through it really quickly. So what happened, this is of course Hannibal, the Carthaginians are down there at the bottom. The Romans are up there in the blue over there. So, you know, they're lining up against each other. The Romans line up in their usual formations, 3 lines. And the Carthaginians do something very unusual, which is this kind of semicircle facing outwards line. And that was not the best part of the infantry. Those were like the light infantry kind of. The elite troops were these ones on the side, the ones that you said the Africans, they were really Libyan spearmen. Those were the heavy troops, but you know, the Romans really had no clue what was going on here. So of course they see this thin line in the middle. They see that the light troops, the not very good troops, are in the middle. So they think, well, we can just push right through it, break the line, just apply big pressure on the middle, and just break the line. And you know, it was a sound plan, except for that that was exactly what Hannibal wanted them to do. So they fall for it, and the Romans start advancing right down the middle of the Carthaginian line. At the same time, they're engaging on the flanks with the cavalry. You see there's cavalry on both flanks. They just engage, and you know, the Carthaginian cavalry is superior to Roman cavalry, so they will rout them. And so we get to the second phase of the battle right here. As you can see, the cavalry just routed the Romans. Cavalry on the left is defeated. The one on the right is about to be defeated. But now the important part of it is the infantry battle. As you can see in the middle, all the Roman lines are just pushing the Carthaginian center back. They're just pushing it back, and they're quite successful at doing it. You know, there's 80,000 men. Hannibal was about 50,000 strong in this battle, so he was outnumbered by a lot. And you know, it's a lot of pressure that he had to hold in the middle. So psychologically, the Romans were thinking, well, we're winning this battle. You know, we're pushing them back. They were forming this circle formation facing us, and now we're pushing them back. What they failed to realize was that they were, by pushing forward through the middle, they were kind of flanking themselves by the heavy troops which were on the flank, the Africans. As you see there, the little signs, Africans move forward. That's exactly the trap that Hannibal had for them. So, you know, they keep pushing forward, trying to break the line. Before they realize they have been completely surrounded, Hannibal gives the orders, well, he already prepared the orders before the battle, that the center of his line should start retreating very slowly, very, very slowly, so it wouldn't break the formation. So, you know, they keep moving back, and the Romans get the feeling that it's them who are pushing them back, when in reality they are really just walking back. And you know, they fall for the trap. Eventually, the circle that was facing outwards now is facing inwards, and it's like a bowl when all the Roman troops get trapped inside. The heavy infantry on the flanks, it's now really surrounding the troops. It turned inside and start just killing everybody. And then the cavalry, which defeated the Romans, is coming back and completing the encirclement. So now all the Romans are inside that little bowl, just getting completely annihilated. 50,000 Romans died that day in a matter of hours, a couple hours probably, 50,000 of those. And some of the accounts of history say that they were so tight, they were so packed together that the legionnaires couldn't even lift up their shields or their swords to fight back. Like, they were just so tightly packed that they couldn't even defend themselves. So they just got hacked to death by the short swords, which is going to lead to another sponge pattern, because the swords that the light infantry of Hannibal used in this battle, they were so effective in close combat that the Romans will eventually adopt them as their standard weapon. And I'm going to show you that later. So you know, this might look simple, but you know, doing that in a big scale, it's pretty impressive. It's especially when you're outnumbered and you're facing an army that has better training, and you have an army that you cannot even communicate with. So you know, and this was not the first time they met. This is the fourth time Hannibal crushed Rome. So really, it was very brilliant for him. And you know, eventually they would go ahead and lose the war to another. Eventually, after this, Hannibal had the chance to invade Rome, but he decided not to. It's just one of those questions that nobody but him knows the answer. Why didn't he invade Rome? But I mean, the fact is that he didn't, and then the Romans retaliated by actually attacking Carthage. At Carthage, the government called Hannibal back to defend them, but you know, it was just too much. Hannibal couldn't defend them. He lost at the Battle of Zama, which actually is recreated in the movie Gladiator, if you saw that.
The battle, what? And the movie called what?
Gladiator?
Gladiator?
Yeah, when they're fighting in the Colosseum, the arena, they're recreating the Battle of Zama, which is where Hannibal lost to Scipio, Publius Cornelius Scipio, which was also known as the Africanus. And he was one of Rome's finest generals. But I mean, there are a lot of factors why Hannibal lost. We're not really going to talk about them here, but I mean, so you know that this is a straight geek pattern. This is still used today. That's a very clear example of how strong this pattern can be. There's just these brilliant minds that are still studied today, and you know, it's pretty impressive to do what he did. So that's what I have to say about Hannibal. Now, we eventually, like I said, the Romans won the Second Punic War, and they then went and won the third one as well, and then they wiped out Carthage from the map pretty much, and that was it for the Punic Wars. So this is, after these wars, this is really when Rome rises to power. There's no other one that's going to challenge it in the Mediterranean, so they really rise to power, and this is the key to Roman success, the Roman army. It is by far the most efficient and the best army of the ancient world. And I mean, it had some evolutions that I want to show you. This is the earliest part of this is how the army used to fight during the Punic Wars. This is the kind of army that defeated Hannibal in North Africa. And you know, they would usually line up like this in 3 lines. That's why it's called a triplex assis. That's Latin for 3 lines or triple line. And they would have a variety of troops, each one serving different purposes. At the end, you might see those little dots. Those are the light troop, the velites. These are guys that are just very lightly armored. They just have javelins. That's their job, just skirmish. Throw javelins, lure the enemy to come at you. That's really all they do. They really don't have, you know, hand-to-hand skills. They're just support troops. Then you have the actual first line of infantry, which are the hastati. And these are the youngest guys. They're really made for hand-to-hand combat, close combat. They're not really well armored. As you can see, they only have a plate just protecting their chest. And they have a short sword and their shield. You know, and these were the ones that would engage in combat first. Then the second line were these guys, the principes, and these were the best young fighters. That's the way to define it. And you see, as you can see, they are more heavily armored. But they still do a kind of hand-to-hand combat, and it's really up to them to win the fight. These are the guys that Rome brings when they need to finish the battle. To win the battle, these are the guys who come in. And then the third line, those were the veterans, the oldest veterans of the army, known as the triarii. Those were all the way at the back. They didn't have swords, they had long spears, as you can see there in the picture. And you know, they would rarely go into combat. If it was really, really needed, they would go into combat. Their main job at a battle was to protect the army from being flanked or outmaneuvered. And most of the times it was to protect the retreat. You know, if the army is going to retreat, if the general needs to retreat the army, they cannot just turn around and run. You know, that's going to cause a lot of casualties. It's going to change it down. That's just going to disorganize everything. It's going to be chaos. So what they do is they set up a line of these guys, the triarii, to protect the retreat. So now the opponent will kind of think twice before they go chase after you, because they would have to go through the veterans. And so they're there to protect the retreat of the army, kind of. So this was the earliest stage. And you know, the Roman tactics and strategies remain pretty much the same, but the evolutions that it took were basically concerning the organization of the army, the standardization of the army, the recruitment process, the logistic process of the army, and that is called the Marian reforms. The Marian reforms, they're called like that because it was Gaius Marius who made those reforms. Gaius Marius was the uncle of Julius Caesar, and he's the one who fought the first 2 civil wars in Rome. So basically, as you can see, the formation is pretty much, this is really the best, okay, this is like the golden age of the Roman army. These are the legionaries of Julius Caesar, which we'll talk about at the end. So this is the finest army in the ancient world. And this is how it was split into legions, 4,800 men strong each. They were divided, it's a whole system. You know, I don't even think I should go through all of it, but it's just, everything is perfectly organized, perfectly measured, and that's why it was such an effective war machine. And it's the standardization of the army that made the whole difference. Now, this that you see here, that's a legionnaire, a Roman legionnaire, and now instead of having 4 different classes, the velites, the hastati, principes, and triarii, now all of these guys are like him. They are just legionnaires. So now all of them are the same equipment. They all fight the same way. They serve the same purposes. So now everything is standardized. The reforms also allow to, you could be enlisted in the army at a younger age. You could stay there longer. The pay was raised. I think even non-Romans could enlist in the army. Maybe not in the early stages, but later they could. So really, the reforms completely changed the way the Roman army functioned. And this follows the tweaking pattern, because the Romans, well, Marius kind of figured he had to kind of make this adjustments to the system to fight the new enemies that Rome had to face, which were barbarians, mainly Gauls and German tribes. And the one thing that he noticed is that he realized that no matter what, they will most likely every single time fight in number inferiority. They would always be outnumbered by the enemy. That's the one thing he realized. So he devised this system to counter that, to make sure that the Romans could still beat them even though they were going to be outnumbered. And he had a very particular way of how it worked. Again, like we did last time, it's one thing to say it, but I think it's better to see it. Let me pull out his simulator. So this is the Roman legion. You see, it's pretty similar to what you see here in the picture. This is how it looks. They're 4,800 men strong, and this is the way they march. This is how they march into battle. This is not the way they fight. This is just the way they march into battle. And I'm going to show you how it works. If you notice, they line up in this kind of checkerboard formation. You see, there are like the second line fits kind of in the holes of the first line and that stuff. So this is really how it worked. As you see, well, here's the enemy represented by the Gaul army. So eventually they're going to charge the main line. Now, as a Roman general, you really don't want to enter battle with all these gaps between your lines, because if you enter combat with these holes between your lines, then enemies are going to get through these holes. So now this unit is going to be fighting on its right, on the front, and on the left. So you really don't want to fight three different fronts. You only want to keep it in front of you. So what they do, they fill in the gaps with the line behind them. That is why they have this kind of checkerboard formation, so they can use this flexibility. So this is what happens. As soon as the enemy approaches, as you can see, the lines just come down the gaps and just fill in the gaps. See, and now you have a complete compact line battlefront, which is just like you see in the picture down here. And there you have it, a complete line, just no holes in between, no gaps, and now they can take any charge, doesn't matter who it is. So here come the Gauls, and now they use their secret weapon. This is one of my favorite weapons in the ancient world, and I'll talk about it in a minute. So they just throw they're not spears, they're called pilum. I'll tell you about them in a minute. So this is what happens. You know, the first charge usually went down quick because of that weapon. They would just throw them at the enemy, and most of the time that would be enough to break them, just like it happens here. You know, it's broken, and now they go back, they kind of flee. But you know, Gauls are really, you can see they're very disorganized. You don't see formations as you see here, but they're very brave. You know, they rely on numbers and bravery and strength to win their battles. So now they're going for a full-out charge. And here you see all the army now is ready to charge it. Now the Romans have barely fought, so they're still fresh. They haven't had any not significant casualties. So you know, they're ready to take the charge now. They don't have any more of their pilums, so they can't throw them anymore. But now they're just going to take the charge head on. And you know, the battle is pretty fierce, but it doesn't matter, because Roman legionaries are meant to fight hand-to-hand combat. That's what they're specialized at, fighting hand-to-hand. So you see they're just fighting, they're just killing. And you know, this simulation isn't quite accurate. The Gauls should really be killing more of these guys. But just for the purposes of showing you how it worked, what would happen is that at any point in the battle, well, it's not really called a general, it's called legatus. That's the guy in charge of the legion. If he felt that the first line was taking a lot of casualties, that they were exhausted, that they were wounded. You know, if he felt that they had to stop fighting, what he would do is, you know, sound the kind of the alarm, the sound with the corncern, the guy with the trumpet. He will blow the trumpet, and then this is what would happen. The lines would go back to the checkerboard formation, and then the second line will come down through those same gaps and take the place of the first one, just like it happens here. So they disengage, go back to the checkerboard formation, and if you see, they retreat right through the same gaps, which if you see, it's perfectly measured to be as wide as a unit is. So they go up those, and the second line comes down the same gaps, like you see it here. They come down the same gaps, and now in a matter of seconds, they take the place of the first one, and now all they have to do is close the gaps in between the lines, and which they do immediately. You see the second line comes to the front, and then they just close the gaps, and they have another line of infantry completely closed. And this was the key to beating numerically superior troops or armies, because now this line that's fighting is fresh, completely fresh. They were just waiting there in the battle. They're completely fresh. They don't have any casualties, no wounded. They're completely ready to go into battle. And on the other hand, the barbarians it's the same people who have been fighting all battle long. So, you know, now they're tired, they are wounded, they have taken heavy casualties, and you see it is, now the line that was, the first line who was fighting, it goes all the way to the back, and it just rests. That's what they do. They rest, they reorganize, they resupply, they heal their wounds, or whatever they need to do in case they need to go back to battle. But now the one that initially was the third line comes down to the second spot, and you know, say the line that's fighting is doing bad. Well, all they got to do is blow the horn, and then the second line will come down again. The first line would go back, and you know, they would just pretty much switch spots, and then they would just keep fighting. They close down the gaps, and they just keep fighting. So this is how Marius pretty much envisioned the way Romans were going to deal with being outnumbered every single battle, by pretty much leaving the lines so that you will always have fresh troops fighting in the front line, while your enemy was already, it was the same people. They were tired, they were, you know, wounded, they were demoralized because of the casualties, and it was pretty effective. Rome barely lost battles with this kind of armies. You know, this only lasted for a few hundred years, but Rome barely lost any battles. And you know, barbarians really completely demoralized. You just start running away, and you see, it doesn't matter that it's all this huge amount of pressure on one single spot, because they have all these lines in the back to support them. So you know, it's a very, it might look simple here, but you know, trying to do this in large scale, it's really not that simple. So that's how a Roman legion used to work, and that's the kind of army that ruled the battlefields for some 400 years, something like that. And that is a straight pattern of, that is the example I was talking about from the fusion pattern, because it was a technical pattern. The part that he had to restructure the whole army, so that, you know, there's technical evolutions there that include the ones I'm going to talk about right now. You also have the geek pattern, of course, because it was one person, one character who was the mastermind of this whole evolution. Then you also have the tweaking pattern, because he had to adjust the Roman armies to the new enemies that Rome was facing, which were numerically superior. So he had to make this adjustment, and you see all the combination of all those patterns, and of course the sponge pattern, because he didn't radically change it. He just adjusted what he knew was the Roman army before this. So he absorbed what the Roman army was before it, and he just tweaked it a little bit and created this kind of standard army. So there you see a combination of 4 patterns that make the fusion pattern itself. This is a great example of that. And you know, these are some of the other technical evolutions that happen in the Roman army. This is the ballista. It's a siege weapon that was used against fortifications or even in open battlefields. And it's an evolution of the Greek catapult. You know, they use torque force rather than tension. Each legion had about 20 of these. So, you know, that's a technical evolution. I mean, technological evolution. And now this one, this is the scariest weapon in the ancient world. This is called the Gladius Hispaniensis. It's a short sword. It's about 50 centimeters long. And this became the standard weapon of the Roman army. This is the weapon that the Carthaginians were using when they beat the Romans at the Battle of Cannae, the one we just saw. And you know, the Romans adjusted it a little bit to standardize it for its army, but the concept of the sword would remain the same. It's called Gladius Hispaniensis because it came from Hispania or Iberia, which is Spain today. And this weapon was perfectly balanced, so it would be literally an extension of the arm of the legionnaire. You know, it wasn't one of those big swords that you have to take massive hacks and just slash the enemy. It was just an extension of the arm, so that's why it was very effective, because it was quick, and because of the shape of the tip of it, it would kill it. Even if the wound was not mortal, the little, you know, the oxygen that would get into the wound would definitely kill him after the battle. So this was a deadly weapon, and this weapon killed more people in its 400 years of existence than all the weapons put together during all the Middle Ages. So this little sword was responsible for millions of deaths. And this is the other weapon that I was talking about. This is the ones that look like javelins, but they're not javelins. They're called pilum. Well, pilum is the singular, pila is the plural. And what they are is, it's basically a javelin, but the difference is that little, you know, the little thing you see in the middle, the one that puts together the metal piece with the wood piece. And there's a close-up in that picture, the smaller picture, there's a close-up of what that is. And the reason why this is a wonder of military engineering is because, well, each legionnaire had two of these. They have a heavy one and a light one. They would throw both before they engage in combat. You know, the purpose of this was ideally to kill the guy they threw it at, but in case he had a shield, which a lot of them did have shields, when they raised it to protect themselves from this weapon would get stuck in the shield, and the little piece that joins both parts, it was designed to break at impact. So, you know, even if you protect it with your shield, this thing would be stuck in your shield, because at the moment the pilum impacted the shield, it broke and it bent, as you see there in the picture. So it would just be hanging in your shield, and it would make it useless. You cannot fight with a shield that has a spear through it, and you know, you could eventually hurt yourself, and if you don't, it's just useless. So they had to drop the shield, and without the shield, it was, you know, pretty easy to just go and hack them with the short sword that they had here. And you know, the wonderful thing about this one is that little piece was designed so that all you had to do was replace it after the battle, and you could still use the same pilum for the next battle. So that's what they did after battle. They would pick up as many as they could, replace a little piece in the middle, and it was ready to be used again. So definitely a wonder of military engineering, and that's again a technical pattern, technology that allowed the Roman armies to rule the battlefields. And so this is the army. This war machine is the army that was put into the hands of another brilliant mind, which was Julius Caesar. I'm sure you've heard about. That's a sculpture of him, Julius Caesar. That's Pompey. That is Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle, and that is Octavian, Emperor Octavian. I'm sure you heard about some of these characters. I mean, they're in movies, series, in Shakespeare plays. You know, this is by far the most fascinating period in Roman history, and it's mainly two events that happened in this period: the Gallic Wars and the Civil War. I mean, we're not going to go into a lot of detail on those, but what you have to know is that this was a time when Julius Caesar was pretty much running things in Rome until the Civil War broke out after he won the Gallic Wars. And regarding the Gallic Wars, there's one more battle that I want to show you that really shows another brilliant mind put into use. And this one is called is the siege of Alesia. Just to give you some background on it, it happened during the Gallic Wars. This was the last battle. You know, Caesar had pretty much conquered all of Gaul. He only lost one battle at Gergovia, but now this was the last stand of the Gauls. So, let me play it here. So this is what happened. That is Alesia. It's a city. It's in France today, like in the middle part of France. So this is what it was. It was a city fortress kind of in the hilltop. There it was, and that's where all the Gauls were inside that, led by their leader Vercingetorix. And there were I think, between 60,000 and 80,000 Gauls inside that city. So of course Julius Caesar, he wants to win this war once and for all, so he goes and besieges them. You know, it's a normal, at the beginning it's just a normal siege. So he gets there, and what he does is he just builds a wall around the main city. You know, well, I mean the main hilltop. So this is what he does. He just completely walls it around so that nobody can live the city and nobody can come into the city. So he's just trying to starve them to death. He really has no rush. The rush is on the Gauls. So he's just trying to starve them to death. He's not trying to lead a direct assault on the city. He's just trying to starve them. And you know, it's pretty successful while it lasted, but suddenly word reaches Caesar that an army of 250,000 Gauls is ready to come in and rescue the city. So you know, Caesar's army was around 20 to 25,000 strong at this point. There's a force of 250,000 coming at him. So you know, at this point, most generals would be like, okay, clean it up. Let's get out of here, and we'll live to fight another day. You know, we'll come up with a different strategy. We just need to get out of here. Well, what Caesar did was something that had never been done before, and it was pretty impressive. What he did was, since he was not planning on leaving, he built a second wall, an outer wall. So he built a second one, and now he put his whole army, the whole Roman army was placed inside that wall. As you can see here, right there. That is all the Roman army inside that wall. So now he's, in a way, he's still besieging the city in the hilltop, but at the same time he's protecting himself from the attack that's about to happen. And eventually it happens. It comes from the southwest of his position, and it's 250,000 Gauls that come to save the army. But you know, the fortifications are pretty strong, so they push the attack back. They reject the attack. And at the same time, when you know the leader of the Gauls sees that the attack failed, he tries to, well, they actually kind of attack at the same time. He comes out of the fortress of the city and also tries to break through the defenses of Caesar. So you know, ironically, this is Caesar is also, he's being besieged, but at the same time he's besieging the other city, the city. So you know, it's kind of a complex situation here. But the Romans managed to hold the position very, very strongly. And now, instead of putting pressure on only one spot, the Gauls decide to come back and attack on 3 different points. But you know, again, the Roman resistance just pushes them back. They just can't get through the defenses because it's a whole, you know, it's not just a wall. He built ditches, he built you know, moats around it. He had I think every 25 meters he had battlements and fortresses, you know, supporting each other. So it was a whole defensive system that the Gauls just couldn't get through. And you know, eventually, since the 250,000 Gauls who were coming to save the city, they just couldn't get through. Eventually, Vercingetorix, the leader of the Gauls, decides to surrender the city. He doesn't want to, you know, have his army killed, getting his whole army killed. So he just surrenders the city to Caesar, and that's how he wins the Gallic Wars. And this, again, this concept of sieging and being besieged at the same time is still used in theory today for military academies. They still teach that concept. So, you know, this is the legacy of the brilliant minds of the likes of Hannibal and Caesar, which strictly follow the geek pattern. And so the last people we're going to talk about are the barbarians. And you know, barbarians, you all get the picture of it. Those are Germanic barbarians at the top. These are Visigoth. There are dozens and dozens of barbarians. And these are the ones who kind of are responsible or hold the most responsibility of bringing Rome to its downfall. And what happened here was, this is an example, I think it's the only example through all my research in which evolution was for the worse rather than for the better. What happened was that the Roman Empire became so large, it would stretch so largely that it couldn't hold out all the, it couldn't protect its frontiers. You know, barbarians were at every gate, and Rome just didn't have enough manpower to protect the frontiers. I think they had, last time I checked, it was a frontier, adding it up, it was 2,000 miles frontier. You added all the frontiers that they had with other nations, and they had 50,000 men to protect it. So you know, that's less people that you can fit in a football stadium. So just think of, you know, half a football stadium trying to protect 2,000 miles long with armies 10 times your size trying to get through. So you know, Rome was out of manpower. They couldn't handle it. It was just too much. So what did Rome do? They adopted a defensive strategy, just like the Assyrians did 1,000 years before them. And you know, again, following the pattern, the tweaking pattern, they had to adjust to the situation. So they start building walls and fortresses at the borders. You got Hadrian's Wall in Britain. You got the Antonian Wall later in Scotland. Then you have all the walls that were built between the Rhine and the Danube to hold the Germanic tribes back. So, you know, this is the strategy that they adopted now. But even then, it's not enough. These fortresses and defenses really can't hold the barbarians back at all. So, you know, as the saying goes, if you can defeat them, join them. So that's exactly what they do. Rome starts allowing barbarians to come into Rome peacefully, kind of. They kind of make them their citizens, and they try to kill two birds with one rock, because they kind of relieve the pressure of the threat of an invasion, and at the same time, the one thing they require of these barbarians is to join them in the army. So now they start mixing barbarians into the Roman army. So now the Roman army is a mixture of former Roman soldiers and barbarians. And you know, that's definitely a tweaking pattern. They needed manpower, so that's the evolution that the Roman army took. They had to add barbarians, but this was for the worse, because this just weakened the Roman army further. And these are some of the things that happened. For example, forever the symbol of power for Rome was the eagle. The eagle was proudly held by any legion, and any legion who lost the eagle, it was a dishonor. You know, the eagle had to be protected. And you know, when they start doing this, when they start adding barbarians, they change the eagle to a dragon, which you see up there. Now that's a new symbol of Rome's power, the dragon. And this is because in most mythologies and religions of barbarians, dragons are pretty important. So, you know, they just kind of gave into it. And now these are the new troops, the one you see at the bottom right. That is the new Roman army. It looks nothing like the one that Caesar had. You know, this is moving towards a medieval army where heavy cavalry owned the battlefields. And you know, that would be the downfall of Rome. And it's like I said, it's the only example that I've found in which an evolution was kind of a de-evolution, because it was for the worse rather than for the better. And you know, barbarians kept rolling in, eventually leading to the fall of Rome. This was probably the largest invasion. They were the Huns. I'm sure you all heard, maybe you did talk about the Huns. They were led by Attila, which is this guy down here. He was actually nicknamed the Scourge of God, because he really brought chaos and terror, not only to Rome, but everywhere they went through. They came from the steppes of Asia. They're actually descendants of the Mongols, which would really, really cause problems in the West in the 13th century. So, you know, they were horsemen. That's all they were. They didn't have infantry in the army. It was just a horse army. And they were the best horsemen in the world at that time. They weren't very numerous, but they were very fierce, and you know, they were great warriors. They could master 4 weapons at one time. You know, they could master the spear, the bow, the sword, and they had darts. They also had darts that they would use in close combat. And that it was all cavalry. That's all they did. Even some Roman accounts say that they couldn't even walk straight, like their their legs were just crooked of how much time they spent on horseback. They slept on their horses, they ate on their horses, they just lived on horseback all the time. And it was pretty scary because they were able to cover, they were so well trained, they were able to cover 100 miles in one day, the whole army. Caesar's army was the army who at that time, at his time, it was the army who was able to cover the most. At forced march, they could cover 50 miles a day. Usually, the average was 30 miles. If you forced it, if you pushed it, they could get 50 miles in a day. These guys could do 100 in one day. So, you know, in a matter of days, it could be in one place, the next day they could be gone somewhere else where you don't know where they are, you don't expect them. They're swift, they're fast, they're fierce. So, you know, the Huns were really, really a big threat of Rome. And this was actually the last great battle that Rome fought. It was the Battle of Chalons, or the Battle of the Catalaunic Fields in modern-day France. The Romans managed to win it because of their allies, the Visigoths. They actually beat the Huns back, but you know, they were, after that, Rome was just completely devastated. It was just too weak to face any other invasions, and I mean, it happened. Invasions just kept rolling in, but now all the strength that Rome once had was completely drained, and it eventually got to this guy, Odovaker. He was Ostrogoth. In 476 AD, he deposed the last Roman emperor, and that's how the Western Roman Empire fell. And if you remember, that's the key date. That's where it ends. The ancient history period ends right there with the fall of Western Roman Empire. And you know, after that, the Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, would try to, you know, regain control of the West. They would have a couple of good generals. Belisarius was probably the best one to try to get control back of the Western Roman Empire. They kind of got it back for some time, but it was just a mixture of all the barbarian tribes that joined in. So, you know, the glory of the Roman Empire in the West, at least, it was completely gone at this point. This is where it ended. And so if I'm not mistaken, we have covered 3,000 years of warfare. We look at patterns, and these 5 patterns, and how they change warfare, how they evolve, and some of them how we still have them today. You know, like I said, these last 2 generals that we saw, how their patterns and the things that they came up with, we still see them today. We saw the rise and fall of empires. We saw the lives and the actions of great generals. We talk about Alexander, we talk about Caesar, Hannibal, Scipio, you know, all those great generals. So at this point, you know, this is the end of my research. So I guess my final thesis statement for this one would be that evolution in the ancient world, evolution of warfare in the ancient world can be explained through 5 patterns, which are the ones that we already mentioned. So, you know, that's the end of it. That's the bottom line of all this research, and you just saw the evidence for all of that in these last 3 presentations. So I want to thank you all for being here, for all these 3 presentations, and of course to Professor Turner for letting me use your class for this. So thank you very much. That'll be it.
This was very interesting, and it was relevant to what we studied this semester. We didn't go into the depth that you presented, but there were key things that you talked about that I'm sure the class was able to relate to. So it was good.
Have any questions?
I got one. And doesn't relate to this, but does your program have anything on the Persian army or anything like that?
What program?
The Persians.
Oh, the little software?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this one has like the predecessors of the Persians, but I have another one that has the actual Persians on it. Why? You need something?
Well, I need to get with you for maybe next semester. I think that would be interesting to bring in as something a little different. So if you would email me those websites,
Okay.
I think I may end up investing in it. Because I think the more real you can make it, I think the better students can relate. So this was good. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, I'm going to take roll, and I'm going to let you go.